they announced that yesterday, and some people looked worried. So it's not a movie about China or anything negative about China. It's, does anyone know what the China syndrome is? It was a phrase sort of invented in the 70s, you know?
Oh, I was just adjusting my glasses.
No. Yeah.
Is it like a nuclear power plant movie, right?
It's a nuclear power plant movie, yeah. The China syndrome is the idea that if the fuel in a nuclear reactor, so like nuclear reactors are like coal-powered power stations. There's a whole lot of heat in a coal power station. It's from burning coal, and that heat makes steam. You can, using the pressure of steam, drive some sort of turbine, something spins around and you make electricity. So when they made nuclear power plants, they kept it all the same, more or less, and instead of the source of heat being burning coal, the source of heat was a nuclear reaction. Now, of course, the nuclear reactions we've seen and the bombs and things we all know about are explosive, catastrophic nuclear reactions, and they needed a much slower nuclear reaction, not an explosion, just a much slower release of all the potential energy inside the fuel. So the idea behind a nuclear reactor is you're always putting on the brakes. It's like you're going in a go-kart down a hill. You've got your thing that makes heat, not too much. So you're just constantly trying to stop it getting too much. With a coal reactor, if it goes out of control, if something goes wrong, then it just goes out. I mean, that's its default. It's we call it the failure mode is the power plant goes out. If it doesn't get oxygen or something goes wrong, it doesn't go out. You have to actually keep working really hard on it to make it stay hot. With a nuclear plant, though, there's this possibility that if something goes wrong, it doesn't go out. What happens is all the things we've been doing to slow it down don't work, and then it could run away. And when it runs away, the heat in the reactor, because of the reaction, can be so great that it might cause the fuel to melt. And if that happens, then it's... So the nuclear reactors are all built with this idea of a containment around them, because what we don't want is the nucleation, the radiation, the nuclear stuff getting out into the outside world. That's our fear. So the water that's inside it sometimes is exposed to radiations or has radioactive solids in it and things. So we don't want water that might be contaminated getting out. There has to be some sort of closed system. And if we've got outside water going in, we like to have it physically separated from the inside water. So all the time we're just trying to make sure that nothing bad gets out. And the disaster is, or one of the possible disasters, is that it might run away and the fuel might melt, and if it gets so hot, it can actually melt through the supporting material and just go down and keep going down. And there's one scenario in a famous article called The Problems with Nuclear Plumbing that said, well, it could just melt and just keep going down. And once it goes down, it sinks into the earth and it'll keep going down. I think I read some reports that if the ground was all sand for 100 meters or 100 feet around, it would all just go molten and it would just keep sinking down. And another one saying if it went into the ground, it could stay there for a year or two, just getting worse and worse in the ground. And of course, in the ground is the water table and all sorts of other things. Other bad things can happen too, in addition to it going down. You know, the reactor top can blow off because of too much steam pressure, or there can be leaks or all sorts of things, and releasing clouds of radioactive particle or steam into the atmosphere. And that's, of course, our fear. So the China syndrome is what they called this thing when the fuel overheats and goes down and it just keeps going. And the person that said it, when I grew up, we used to say it too. I bet you didn't if you grew up in China. We used to say, if you dig this hole deep enough, you'll come out in China. That was our idea of the other side of the world. I don't think the other side of the world for Australia is China. I think that was a phrase we inherited from somewhere else, but certainly in some parts of America or South America, I think it is true that if you went all the way through. So the idea would be, gee, if this overheats, it'll go down and down, and that's called the China syndrome. It'll just keep going down until it comes out in China. Of course, it wouldn't. It won't be able to burn through the mantle, and even if it did, it's not going to be able to fight gravity on the uphill climb on the other side. So, you know, it's a fancy figure of speech. But anyway, and why are we talking so much about nuclear stuff? Because we're going to use nuclear energy as a great example of disaster, of a system that was built to be safe and had a whole lot of safeguards in it, and it wasn't. And we've seen that over and over. We'll also talk about space shuttles and various other complex systems. And in fact, Mike, who I don't think you've met yet, I'll try and get him to come and give a guest lecture before the end of term, and I are going up to Queensland tomorrow to the National Safety Conference, System Safety Conference, where safety experts get together and look at how we can make systems safe. And they're interested in them being safe against accidents. We cyber people, I think cyber is a superset of safety science, because we're not just up against accidents, we're up against malicious people who will make things happen that even just by randomness they might not happen. So anyway, it's a great example. We'll be doing more about it in the future. And tonight, to get ready for that, we're going to look at the film, entirely optional, called The China Syndrome, which is about a nuclear plant going crazy, and what happened and the safety mechanisms in place and how people responded to it. And what we're really interested in is the response, that I'm going to call incident response. So when something bad starts to happen, how do you respond? And if the first time you've thought about it is when it starts to go wrong, then you're in a bad way. And the case study this week is the same. We're going to look at some incidents that could happen, and then we're going to ask you to come up with plans for what people should do. And the idea is that's really good to think about now, not when the thing is happening, because people's gut reaction when the things are happening will be to do the wrong thing. And there's no preparation you need to do. I'll tell you those two, after the break, I'll tell you the two scenarios you'll be given in the case study and discussions this week. And you're just going to try as hard as you can to think of good incident response plans, or sometimes we call it a playbook, for what people should do when it happens. And also we're going to look at the other side, which is really important, which is what to do up front to reduce the chance of it happening, to prevent it. And the nuclear plants and the space shuttle disasters both give us important information about how to respond, but also how to stop things. So the film tonight just demonstrates that so beautifully. It's such a wonderful film. I hope you can see it. It is truly fantastic. So what we're going to do tonight is a couple of things. First of all, I just want to quickly revise and finish off a couple of topics. Then we're going to talk about data and big data. Then I'm going to go and we'll run through a data breach simulation. And what that is I'll tell you how we'll watch a data breach unfolding, and you'll be in the company, you'll be advising the company. And I'll ask you a series of questions. We'll say, this happens next. What do you advise the company now? Oh, you discover this. What do you advise the company now? What should the company do now? And we'll give you a series of options and you have to pick. If I've got Kahoot working, and Caitlin's worked hard to make it work for this many people, you'll be able to answer it on Kahoot. If we don't have it working properly, then you won't. And if it's sort of half working, then I think 200 of you will be able to use Kahoot. So the first 200 in win. And the others can just all imagine, like still do the answers, but you won't get to see your silly nickname appearing on the screen. So that's a really fun exercise. That'll take us about an hour. Then Lyria and I are going to do a discussion about surveillance, and that'll take about half an hour. So that gives me now only about 10 minutes to quickly do all the other things I really wanted to do. So let's jump into them now. First of all, I wanted to do a revision just to finish off. Oh, look at this. Look what I've got. A software-defined radio. Hack RF1. It's so good. I'm going to spend my whole Christmas hacking radio. Wow. I've already thought of all these fun projects. Does anyone, if anyone's interested in doing it with me, I'm interested in seeing how we can hack, just how well protected Bluetooth is. Yeah, I'm thinking how interesting it would be, because I just noticed around the uni, everyone uses Bluetooth keyboards. I'm thinking, at what range, can we work out what's going on and being typed by intersecting the radio waves? And at what range can we do that? What do you reckon?
Well, I know for like Bluetooth headsets,
yes.
You can spoof the like MAC address.
Oh, so good.
Just like
It's going to be so fun. I'm just going to have a whole Christmas of hacking, not just Bluetooth. I want to do a lot of stuff around the airports. There's all sorts of, not transmitting, just picking up. There's all sorts of stuff that's transmitted unencrypted in the clear around airports. So I want to find out. So anyway, it's awesome. If anyone wants to do fun projects to do with that, come and let me know. So here we go. I just wasted a few more minutes, and we're so tight for time, so I'm not going to waste any more minutes. I'm going to jump straight in. What do you want, you crazy thing? Here we are. Oh, I've got to log in. That's crazy. I'm not going to do that. I have to log in. Oh, well, maybe I can log into this. Oh, no, I have to log in. No, I don't. All right, I've got to remember my password, so no one look. Just close your eyes. Did I tell you that once I was at Google? Did I tell you that story? Yes. It's a very funny story.
Was it the one about the privacy policy or whatever?
No, it was the one about the umbrella.
Oh, the umbrella. You had
Oh yeah, the Scarlet A. Yeah, no, another time, I'm just trying to work out how it won't display this on the screen. Another time I was giving a talk and I had to log into my laptop and I realized they had some Googlers from Japan in on the talk and there was a camera behind me as well as one in front. So they could see what I was typing, but I had an umbrella, so I put my umbrella up. I felt a bit like Julian Assange and crouched over the keyboard and logged in that way. I don't know, it sort of felt good to be keeping secrets from Google. Here we go, I'm logging in, but you can't see it. Let's just hope it works. Oh, Caitlin, you're a legend. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. That's fantastic. See ya. That's very, very good. But you've got something else to hack as well. It's going to be the best Christmas. All right, I'm just slowly logging in. It's preparing Windows. I don't know that that's good or bad. Preparing Windows. How many years have since I've logged in? All right, let me start talking while it's doing that. So the topics to quickly catch up on are, we talked a lot about privacy, or we started talking about privacy and getting you thinking about privacy. Now we're talking about big data and data. And data is associated with privacy. In companies, they often have things called data governance plans, and they'll have someone in charge of data and someone in charge of privacy. It's weird, but it's very rare the same person. Hey, it's very rare the same person is in charge of data and privacy, which is a little bit of a problem because they have slightly different objectives. And did I tell you the story that a friend of mine was doing data governance for a large organization, and the data team came up with a data governance plan. And he said, oh good, let me look at the data governance plan. I'll give you some feedback on it from a privacy point of view. And they gave him the data governance plan and he said, it didn't even mention the word governance in it. It was just about all they were going to do. It was nothing about how they were, governance means control, look after and things. So I think it'd be funny to get data governance plans and Google them and see, like search through them and see how many times they mention governance. So here's the thing. I really like nuts and bolts and screws. I love them so much because when you're doing a job, there's nothing better than having the right size nut or bolt or screw with the right thread pattern and the right material it's made out of. And whenever I'm making something, if I have spare nuts and bolts and screws left over, I put them away in jars. And I've got all these little jars labeled with, oh, this is this thread and this screw and this size and this gauge and so on. And I have now, over the years, built this massive collection of nuts and bolts and screws. And whenever I have to do a job, there's nothing more exciting. I go up to my nuts and bolt and screw wall. No, I go up to my nuts and bolt and screw room, and I get out the right nut, bolt, and screw for the job, and it's just fantastic. And my wife makes fun of me. And she says, you're a little bit obsessive. And I said, no, I'm not. But if I'm walking home and there's a bolt on the ground, I'll pick it up. And I'll take it home and carefully put it in the right spot. I love my nuts and bolts and screws. Have you ever collected anything? Are you obsessed about anything? There's some authors who I collect every book they've ever written. Some people like collecting Pokemon Go cards, or I did meet someone once who said, I don't collect anything at all. He was an IT guy. And I said, really? And he said, nothing. And I said, you know, some IT people catalog things like movies or sound files and start collecting them, or audiobooks. Even if they've got way more than they'll ever use, once they've started collecting them, they can't stop. And he said, oh, you got me. I think we're all just sometimes a bit obsessed about something. There's something we collect. A good friend of mine does sewing and really loves fabric, and they just store fabric and they save all these different fabrics. I wonder if you hoard or look after something, and to you it seems completely normal, but to everyone else it seems slightly weird. Now, here's an experiment. My wife said, come on, we need we actually have an outside dwelling. And she says, I need this nut and bolt and screw dwelling back for my parents to come and stay in. And she says, oh, how come all the rooms are full of nuts and bolts and screws? You've got to get rid of some of them. And I said, I can't, they're important. I might need them one day. They'd be worth money. If I threw it out, I'd have to buy another one. It would cost me something. They're valuable. And she said, no, get rid of them. And I said, well, I'll get rid of some. I can do it. I'm not addicted. I'm not weak. So I went up and I looked through them all, and I found I had 2 jars of 50 mil, 1/4 inch wood screws. And I thought, 2 jars. Well, it's a very useful screw. I don't need both jars. So I took the jar and I took it outside and I thought, I'm just going to throw this in the bin so I can do it. I can quit. It's so good. Someone else would love this. I can't throw it out. Instead, I left it carefully by the front gate so people walking along the footpath could see it. And I thought, someone's going to see that and they're going to get so excited. Anyway, every day I'd come home, it would still be just sitting there. No one else was interested in it. And after a week or so, I couldn't stand it anymore. I took it and put it back inside. So if your job is the data person in a company, you love data. You love it so much. Data is worth money. You can get all sorts of value from it. Who knows what value you can get? Some obvious value now, but in the future it might even give you more value. Harvesting this data, you know, why does Tesla, run by that inspired, brilliant man who we all love so much, why does Tesla keep audio recordings of what people say inside the Tesla cars to train their AIs? Why have they been keeping that for years, just hoarding what everyone says? Why does the government love collecting? Why does the university, when I was employed as a staff member, they asked if they could have my passport. And I said, I don't really want to give you my passport. And they said, it's a condition of employment. And I said, okay. And then they gave it back. And I said, you didn't take a copy, did you? And they said, yeah, we did, but we're keeping it securely. And I said, I don't really like that. And they said, it's a condition of employment. And then years later, I was speaking to the data person at the uni. And I said to them, you know, it's really weird. The uni took my passport details when I enrolled here. I mean, that is such an obvious attack for an attacker. That would be embarrassing for the university if staff members lost their passport information because the university didn't look after it. And she said, yeah, I know. I couldn't believe it when I came. There was just this filing cabinet full of photocopies of passports just sitting there. It was insane. So I paid a company, we digitized it all, and now I've got it in a special database that integrates with our whole data lake. So that we have a data lake, and now it's all online and it's completely safe. And I said, why didn't you just burn them or shred them? And she said, no, it could be valuable one day. It's fantastic. So if you ever go to a data person and ask them to delete some data or get rid of some data. So Medibank, when they were breached, they had not only data on current customers, they had data on customers going back so many years. Because why would they ever delete that? Maybe that'd be useful in the future. Maybe they can do actuarial calculations on them, or maybe the person will rejoin. Why would you ever delete data? A friend of mine years ago used to work for Optus, a major telco, and it was back around about the year 2000. And he was in charge of putting a lot of the instrumentation in the mobile phone network. And one day he said to me, you know, what we do is we log every single packet that's sent, and we strip off the metadata and we keep track of all of that. And he said, I can't remember the number, but it's like a terabyte a day of metadata. Or maybe it was less back then. And I said, what do you do? He says, well, we just put it on drives and we back it up and we store it. And I said, why? Why do you have it? And he said, well, you know, it could be useful for traffic analysis or all sorts of things and help us work out how to better look after the customers and what the usages and things are. And I said, wow, a terabyte a day. How long do you keep it for? When do you delete it? And he leaned forward and said, I don't think anyone ever intends to delete any of it. So here's the thing with data. People love collecting it. It's valuable. It's estimated that all the data in the world is now worth more than all of the fossil fuel reserves. All of the oil and gas and coal in the world is not worth as much as the data in the world, based on the valuation of tech companies that have data. So data is seen as very useful. If you talk to anyone in industry or government in a senior position, they'll say, with this data, we can do great things. We can distinguish ourselves in the market. If you look at the government's constantly wanting to open data up to hackathons and let people find value in the data, they just love it. And if you ever said to someone, oh, hey, I see, I'll come in a sec. If you ever said to someone, well, you should probably delete that data. Like, you don't need my passport information now. I've been with the uni for a decade. I don't even know why you needed it initially, but you saw it. You saw I had a password. It's never going to change that I had a password. Why do you need to keep it? Data people never want to delete anything. And if you ever see after a major data breach, sometimes I'm interviewed, and what I'll always say is, what confounds me is why the company even had this data in the first place. They're holding all this data on their customers that they don't need. If the data gets stolen, it doesn't hurt the company, it hurts the customers. That's our data. They have a duty to look after us, and they're just not doing it. They just don't care. They're reckless with our data. So what I wanted to tell you about data is, data's big and exciting, and you can do AI and all sorts of great things on it, and learn about that in other courses. From our point of view, data is toxic. It's like nuclear waste. And the best thing to do with it is to delete it. Because if you delete it and get rid of it properly, then when hackers break into your system, they don't get everyone's data. You know, after the Optus and Medicare breaches, all the government agencies had to issue new IDs, and you needed new driver's licenses and new Medicare cards and all sorts of, all the other data that was lost. And it was very expensive for them to do that, and they had to write to lots of people, and it was really embarrassing when that data breach happened. And one government agency in New South Wales called Service New South Wales said, you know what would be really good? What would be really good is if everyone that was breached, whoever's got that list, if you could send it to us, we'll put it in a special database we set up. And we're going to keep a data lake of everyone in New South Wales that's ever been breached and all their contact and identity information. So if we're breached in the future, this could be valuable. We could write to them and say, Dear X, you've been breached again, if it's the second time. We could customize the emails. And somehow that argument just really persuaded the minister, and that's what they did. So now all that data breached information from Medicare that should have just been deleted and thrown away, now there's another copy of it. And if you look at the latest thing, the Trusted Exchange, TEX, I think it's called, that the government's talking about, it's another system where they're going to keep centralized data on everyone. They're going to lock it, not in a filing cabinet, but in a data lake, and it'll be great because they'll look after it, unlike the other companies. And what's the problem with that? The problem isn't necessarily that the government is malicious. The problem is the government's incompetent. To be really clear, we can't trust them to look after the data. And it's not just the government, every firm's incompetent. No one can protect data against a determined adversary if it's a state actor that's trying to get the data. And government's probably a little bit less good than, say, the best business firms who are protecting data. So no, they're not incompetent in a they should be ashamed way, but they're certainly, they shouldn't be proud and standing up and saying, we're going to look after your data well, because they don't have the ability to. So it will get stolen and it will get breached. So anyway, that's data. Now we've got the screen and it all logged up. I wanted to show you something. How are we going for time? Oh, I'm going to give myself 5 more minutes, and then we'll move on to the simulation, and I'll come back and finish off talking about data and data breaches after Lyria and I have done our thing at the very end, if there's time. What? 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 Oh, by the way, if ever someone asks you to consent to anything, what do? No. If anyone says, do you want to save cookies? You say no. Do you want to adjust your preferences? Yes, I want to adjust my preferences. Do you want to improve your customer experience? No. I don't want you to have any of my data. You know, I think honesty is really important. And have I told you this already, that I tell my children they should never lie? It's something I just think is a personal thing. And when my children were born, have I told you this already? I decided that I wanted to be a trustworthy person to them and that I would never lie to them. And I lied once that I spotted to them, and I was so ashamed. It was about something silly. I'd stolen some chocolate from one of them, and I was going to top it up and replace it before they realized it was gone, and they discovered it was gone. They said, did you have some of my chocolate? And I said, no. But actually I had, but I was going to secretly, anyway, the next day I was just so ashamed I apologized. So it's been quite good because I do never lie to them, because it means when one of them was in quite a serious accident recently and said, Dad, is this okay? I said, yeah, I think this is okay. I think you're going to be okay. I think you're going to get well again. And they just know I will never lie to them. I will always tell them the truth. So she sort of visibly relaxed and was really happy. I think just your word is your bond. It's just part of being a good person. And you should just not lie. Which is awkward with Santa Claus and things like that. I spoiled that for them. And so when they first got on the internet, I said, you know all that stuff about lying? When you're filling in a form to a company or the government, none of that applies. Just lie. Lie, lie, lie. I'm going to be really disappointed if you tell the truth. On every single form, a fake name, a fake birthday, a fake address. Just never tell anyone anything right. Just lie, lie, lie when you can get away with it. And if they want a copy of your driver's license and they're going to check it against your driver's license, then write it down but move a few digits around so you can claim plausibly, oh, I accidentally made a mistake, because they probably won't check it properly. Just lie all the time and never give your data out, because you're giving it to people that might not be mean or evil, but they are incompetent, and that data will get lost. And why do we care when people's data is lost? What's the bad thing about your data being out there? Super quick. Yes?
It can be kind of like used against you or used for other
It can be used against you. How? Let's think of some ways.
like blackmail, doxing.
Oh, yeah, you've done something embarrassing and you could be blackmailed. Yes? Identity theft, because as we spoke about in authentication, I hope you have watched all those and heard all those podcasts. Do make sure you do, because I think it's weird that we did that one with podcasts rather than a face-to-face lecture. I think authentication is the hardest and most important thing that we talk about in the course, and you only get the podcasts, but hopefully you've all listened to them in week 6. But if you haven't, do remind yourself. Yes, we're very bad at doing authentication. Basically, at the end of the day, it all comes down to shared secrets. And the sorts of shared secrets that people remember, we just early on decided would be things like birth date and mother's maiden name. There's no reason, except it's sort of memorable. There's nothing special that means your birth date's a sacred piece of information, except that just lots of systems have used it to authenticate you historically. So people getting information about you now, unfortunately, if you've been authenticated with that information, because it's the shared secret you use, then it lets them impersonate you and do authentication attacks. And that is very easy with financial things and taking out loans and doing all sorts of stuff like that, because the authentication there is so weak and so badly done. So yeah, we don't want people getting the data, or they'll be able to do identity theft. Yes, oh, and I forgot coming to you before.
No, I was going to add on to what you said earlier about
Yes.
collecting weird things. My thing is that whenever I see screens that aren't working properly, I get really excited and I have a whole album on my phone. This was at GYG. It's running on Windows XP apparently. This was at some store. This was also at another store. This was at the Unique.
You are a
brand shop.
legend. You're a legend.
This is the.
Oh, it's the awful one. Sometimes when I'm on a plane, the info system.
The elevators being broken.
Yes. Oh, oh, that is so good. You took all of those?
Yeah.
Oh, that is so good. Yeah. Whenever I see the infotainment system rebooting on an aeroplane, as it scrolls up, you can see all the login commands. And often they're Unix, not the login sequence. Often it's a Unix-based system or a Windows-based system. I like filming it just because it's later on you can see what drivers they've loaded and all sorts of things. Very interesting. And there are funny things to say about the separation between the info system and the avionics. But going back to this, we don't want people to get our data because A, it's our personal data, and B, it can be used to authenticate us. But for me, the second one is annoying, and it means you can have financial consequences with identity theft. And that's really just arising out of poor authentication systems. Ultimately, the way we'll fix that is by having better authentication. And if you've heard the authentication lecture, you know what I think better authentication is and the path to go down. But the people getting data on you, with more data, they can work out more about you. You can triangulate in. Did I ever tell you this story? And then I'll flip to the simulation. Years ago, I was in a boring meeting. Tell me if I've told you this. I mentioned it to someone recently. I was in a boring meeting. I hate boring meetings. I hate Teams meetings. Life is too short to ever be stuck in a boring meeting. So if I'm in a boring meeting, and maybe if you're at home watching this lecture now, it's just like that for you. Here's what you could do if you're really bored. I just give myself a little puzzle. So I was reading a newspaper story while the meeting was going on, and someone was talking about the cost of living crisis. And because we're idiots, stories are illustrated with a photo, so our brain can cope with reading the words. I don't know why, it just relaxes us to see a photo. So there was this photo of, on the table, on a little round wooden table, a wallet or a purse that was sort of open with some notes poking out of it and keys attached to it and transport ticket, just thrown down on the table. And there were just a few notes there. And, it was just to illustrate cost of living, people have wallets, there's money in them. And the interesting thing was, as I looked at it, I realized that I couldn't see any of the serial numbers on the notes. It was like all the notes had been arranged in a way that the serial number wasn't visible. And I thought, what attack can you do knowing the serial number of a note? And I thought about it, and I thought about it, and I couldn't think of anything. And then while I was thinking about it, I suddenly realized, oh, hang on. I can see the keys. The keys are attached to the purse. So if I took that photo of the key, and it's clearly a house key, the top one, if I took that photo of the key and enlarged it to the right side and just got a Lockwood blank, I could file it down and I have a key to that house, wherever it is. I wonder if by the end of this boring meeting, I can work out which house that key would unlock. Challenge accepted. So what I did was I looked at the photo and it said, photo courtesy of blah, blah. And I thought, this photo looks like it was just thrown in the story now. I bet they didn't have stock footage and they just asked someone to take a photo so they've got a picture so idiots can read the story, like me. And it was courtesy of, I don't know, Kiralee Watkins or something like that. And I thought, I wonder if this is too good to be true. Someone who's working at the ABC and just gave them the story. It was on an ABC website. Just gave them, I made her name up, just gave them a photo. She just took it and sent it in because the newsroom needed one. So I looked up Kiralee Watkins, and there is a Kiralee Watkins working at the ABC. And I thought, oh, maybe it's her. So I started searching up about her, and I found that she'd graduated from journalism school 3 or 4 years before. She'd worked in Sydney for a while, but then she'd moved down to a regional area, might have been Kiama or somewhere. And she was in the ABC office down there. And I found some of her student essays and student articles and things she'd done as a student. And she set up a blog where she talked about how hard it was to be a journalism student and how much she loved journalism and things. And I found her saying that she was going to move from Sydney down back home because she'd been in Sydney studying, but it was hard, and I wondered if Kiama was her home. And so I then just started, and I found an article she'd done for a student newspaper as a young grad saying, now I work and I really love it, though I have to commute all the time, it's a little bit hard, but I really love my job. It's fantastic, though I'm finding it difficult with my children. And then there was another article she did for some magazine or something, which was talking about working mums, and it was a picture of her holding 2 children, one a newborn baby and one about 1.5 years old or so, very close in age. And she was sort of standing in a park somewhere holding them, but all dressed up in her work clothes and saying, it's hard at the beginning of the day, I've got to drive around like crazy dropping the children off before I can go into work, and I miss them so much, and it's really hard working so far away. And I thought, ooh, okay. So I started searching and I found company records of, I think, her parents and quite a few people with her surname down south. And I wondered if they were her parents or relatives. And I found someone, and then her name changed at some point in the story. And I found someone, anyway, I slowly, just by finding addresses, looking at various things, I found where I thought she lived. I narrowed it down to a house that her business was, her husband's business actually was registered. He was a director of it, and he was registered there. And I thought, I wonder if that's the house. So then I jumped on Google Street View and I drove along that street. And just 3 or 4 houses down is a big park. And by moving the car, I could line it up and I could exactly reproduce the background of that shot of the lady holding the babies in the photo. So then I Googled that address and I found the records in Domain for it, and it had been rented out recently, and there was a floor plan and shots of the inside of the house, a couple of years ago. And I suddenly realized at this point, and the meeting was still going on, gee, it was boring, I knew her name. I knew what she looked like. I knew where she lived. I knew her children's names. I knew how old her children were. I knew the birth date of one of the children. I knew the daycare that the children went to. But I knew where her house was. I had a floor plan of her house. I knew when she commuted to work, and I had the key for the house. And it took like half an hour. This is why we don't like data getting out. Because bits of data by themselves are innocuous. But the problem with data is you can get these things emerging from it. Once you get a big enough collection of data, then more information can emerge from it. And the famous story is the Medicare one that I'm sure we've spoken about before, when they released all the health records in Victoria, and that really smart mathematician in Victoria, Vanessa Teague and Chris Culnane took all that data and re-identified it, because once you've got a lot of data, although individual records were de-identified, once you could track an individual person and get a fingerprint from them, you could re-identify all the data. So data you just want to get rid of, you want to keep it secret, you don't want to leak it out, you want to lie about it, you don't want people to store it, you want them, and you cannot trust people to look after it. And I only said you can't trust them because they're malicious, but actually you can't trust them for a range of other reasons. For example, when there was a leak of information from Parliament House a while ago, one of the government's plans was leaked or something like that. There was a real witch hunt inside Parliament House to work out who had leaked the information to a journalist. And you can bet they were going over logs, they were going over security footage inside Parliament House, which is supposed to be there to protect the security of Parliament House. But if the Prime Minister says, I need to see that footage, of course, and this is called scope creep, it can get handed over to solve other things like political party things. So you can't be sure that people aren't going to take your data and do other things with it. That was my big data thing. Is that enough on that?
Yeah.
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 And then we'll go and do the surveillance. And now, if people, there were a couple of hands. Does someone just want to say something quick? And then we'll jump onto the data breach. Yes?
Like a lot of companies really don't like that, like people don't want their data. I think there was conversations like with the new privacy legislation about companies being like, well, actually we do need this data, and like saying like, oh no, we should.
Oh, we need the data. Yeah.
I think it was specifically like Optus saying, oh no, we do need the driver's license. Like, why do you need the driver's license at all? There's no reason you should.
Or there might be a legislative requirement because the government likes to identify every SIM card with an individual. And Australia is one of the few countries where they can do that because we've got quite draconian things, laws.
Second thing
Yeah.
too,
Yeah.
which is a lot of these companies, including I think Optus and so forth, there's a lot of like sort of know your customer laws.
Yeah, yeah.
In other words, you
Money
have to
laundering.
make sure you know who you're dealing with in particular. I'll use this. Does that help with the?
Yeah. NYC they call them or something. KYC. Thank you.
So if you do money laundering and you send a text
Yeah.
about it, they can see, oh, this phone
Yeah.
this person.
It serves a good purpose, stopping money laundering, stopping paedophilia, stopping drug traffic, stopping terrorism. They're all great excuses to surveil people. And certainly if we surveilled everyone, that stuff couldn't happen. But gee, a lot of other things now can't happen because of those very rare things.
But I think that the idea is, I mean, and it's one of those kind of catch-22 problems. All of the organisations that have those kinds of rules and where they have to verify customers, how do you prove if the regulator asks that you verified the customer? So on the one hand, all you really need to do is have someone tick a box to say I verified a customer, but then you're worried the regulator will say, but how do we know that they
followed the
tick
right
box and
process?
that they didn't actually do it?
Yeah.
And so therefore they keep the record of it. There's another part of this story too, which was a conversation I had with Victor Dominello about the move to
the founding
digital,
father of Service New South Wales.
right,
Yeah.
which was the move for, you know how you have a digital driver's license now in New South Wales?
Yes.
Yeah, so part of the reason he did that was because he figured that it would mean fewer people would photocopy the driver's license and keep it in a drawer, right? Because the idea is if you're handing them a license, it's very easy, you pop it in the photocopier, you know, you do that and so forth. But if you have to, people aren't going to hand over their mobile phones. But of course, companies now, what they do is they take a photo of the license on your mobile phone.
Yeah.
With their mobile phones.
So what Victor Dominello needed to do, and I'd like all politicians to do, is rather than just having a thought bubble and saying, I know I've solved that problem that's really difficult, everyone do what I say, to actually consult with people and ask around and say, because it's just the digital driver's licenses are just so horrible. Yes?
This might be a dumb question, but like, so what? So you have her like address and you have, you know, when she goes to work, you can find that out by like creeping her in other ways. Like, and then what would you do with that? Like, what's rob her, or like what could you do with? Do you know what I mean? Like,
What's the point of privacy? I guess I could be a crazy nut psycho.
But you could be a crazy nut psycho without the internet. You could just follow her. That's also like, do you know what I mean? Like, it's sure you got it faster, but it's the same, like.
I guess I just like privacy, I guess.
I mean, I think there's more to it than that, and it comes back to the identity, like the idea of how we verify people's identity.
Yes.
And often that is based on some fact about them, like your, being able to state your driver's license number, your date of birth, and your address is probably enough to verify your identity for a lot of places.
Yes.
So in other words, if someone has your driver's license, they don't just have that information in the sense of how they might use
Driver's
that.
license, sure, just the address and the house. Like that's
Oh, I see. You're going back to that.
Yeah. So I guess, but the point is, I guess it wasn't her choice. So she might be completely happy for people to have a copy of her house key and know where she lives and know all about her and her children. But here she didn't have a choice. It was thrust on her. So maybe people don't care. I wouldn't like that.
Also, even if you were plotting a crime against someone and you were like a psycho weirdo, right? The more information you have about somebody, technically the easier it is to harm them in some way, right? Because say you know, in this example, you know her address, you know roughly her schedule, you have a copy of her house key. It's suddenly a lot easier to break into her house than a conventional method of, say, picking the lock or other methods. Like you have another option of, for example, breaking into her house or whatever other crime.
Well, you can follow someone for like a couple days and get their
Yeah, you could follow someone,
Like a
but
30-minute
you're more at risk following someone because you're visible. I guess I could steal her identity if I wanted.
with their address.
Well, with all the stuff I know about her.
Bank statements and stuff, and then you can use bank statements to verify identity. So
You know, the thing is like blackmail. It's like, oh, I know where your kids are going to be at 2
Yeah.
p.m. on this day. If you don't transfer me $5,000, bad things will happen. You don't have to show up to their house. You don't have to risk getting caught.
Maybe she doesn't care about privacy. Maybe it's fine, and that's fine. But even if she doesn't care now, maybe she will care in the future. So, yeah, for me that's just, it's really repulsive that people can find out about each other and track us and know what we're doing. I just don't like that. But yeah, maybe she doesn't mind. Maybe she doesn't mind. Yeah.
I have a question. If you leak out maybe one data about yourself, would you reckon that this data can lead to other data?
Yeah, every little piece of clue that you leak is just one more footprint. It's a forensics thing. Every contact leaves a trace. Every little clue is just part of a jigsaw. And the little clues that you think, oh, it doesn't matter, I can do this, and it doesn't matter, I can do that. Every one put together makes a pattern.
Lead to like the bigger details of your data.
Yeah, and you'll find that when you do digital forensics, when they're trying to track down criminals and things like that, they just leak little bits of information here and there, and then the forensic investigator can join it all together and make a bigger story that then demonstrates this person did do that. Yeah. And with their hand there.
I just want to say, even if you can figure out where someone lives without needing to use these cyber stalking techniques, you know, just making it harder for psycho weirdos to follow you around is very, very valuable. Because, like, if I have a particular hatred of Victor Dominello, for instance, right?
Oh no, let's not have a hatred of him. He's a well-meaning man, I'm sure. He's just, yeah.
Let's say I'm the crazy psycho.
Yeah.
Right, and I want to steal his diary.
Yes.
Right, at the moment, because he hasn't leaked all his information online, I can't just go to his house whenever I please. I have to find some public event.
Yes.
You know, secretly sneak around behind him, and maybe he notices me.
Yes.
And he calls the cops on me, and then I'm in jail for being
Yes.
a psycho. Rather
Yes.
than being able to break into his house in peace. So, like, even if it's not perfect security, it's still making it harder.
We'll never have security, yes.
Isn't out there.
Harder is all we can ever do in security. I found out there's a guy called Peter Volandis. Have you ever heard of him?
I've heard of him.
He's something to do with sport, and I was in a meeting and someone said his name with a sneer, and I thought, I wonder who he is. And then I looked him up and found a photo of him standing outside the front of a house doing something with journalists. And I thought, I wonder if that's his house. And it took the rest of the meeting to work out, yes, that was his house. And now I know about his family back in South Africa, and I know all sort of so many things about him. But yeah, and he's not very well liked, so now I know where he lives. Not that I'm going to do of course I'm not going to do anything, but it's just very interesting to know that people could know where he lives. Yes?
I took this course last year, and for like a week I went to the extension lecture, and they talked about recon in the extension lecture.
Recon.
I don't think they talked about this, but like I think like one of the things was Shonen, and like
Yes.
like ways of finding open source information, like, and it was very interesting.
We should do an OSN lecture, shouldn't we? I want to do OPSEC, so why don't we do OPSEC and OSN together in a lecture? Thank you. Yes, that's a great idea. All right, so I think we've taken all the time we were going to take. It is a tricky issue. I hope you enjoy the exercises we've got for you this week. For the first time ever, I've written them in advance of the lecture. So hopefully I'll release them tomorrow before I go up to that conference. I don't have time to show you that fun video I wanted to show. Let me just go through this breach simulation. Now you'll need to get a device out and go to Kahoot, and it might only be the first 200 get in.
Hunger Games.
It's Hunger Games. You can still do it, you just can't get your name on the screen. I'm looking for the video cable. Give me 1 second. Where is it? Come to me. Where are you, video cable? There's got to be
If
a
we needed
cable.
time to set it up, we could give them a 5-minute break.
Oh yeah,
now.
do you want to have a 5-minute break while I set it up? Everyone just take a break and load Kahoot up on your phone. Where is that?
That then gives you time to
Good thinking,
set it
Luria.
up without the
Thank you.
pressure.
Without the pressure. Wah! I nearly normal. How do I actually make it start a presentation? Slideshow, play from start. Thank you. All right, this is something that a cut down version of something we presented at SXSW. Some very smart people from Willis Towers Watson and the Australian Society for Computers and the Law did the original one. Here's just a very cut down version of it, just so you can get a taste of it. Here we go, setting the scene. Lifeguard Medical Services is an ASX 100 SaaS provider, software as a service provider. Its major investors are prominent health insurers and super funds. NASDAQ, it's got a NASDAQ listing scheduled for 2025. Next year it's going on the NASDAQ. It's a major disruptor set to launch the world's first fully digital pathology lab in 2 weeks. It has 1 point, trademark, population tracker, patent pending. It has $2.5 million of pre-sales, mostly from governments around the world with vaccine mandates and big pharma. There was a small technical glitch during a scheduled upgrade a little while ago. The investment in R&D and sales, because they're about to go and list, so they're putting all their effort into R&D and sales. So there's a bit of a hole in the IT budget. Important things to notice, medical data, big governments, around the world, software as a service. Medical data being what? Being delicious, if you're an attacker. Here we go. Update. At 2 o'clock in the morning on Friday the 18th, that fateful day, Heather Tran, a senior database architect in Australia, is working on the patient data migration when the master database becomes unresponsive. After several failed attempts to reconnect, she contacts IT services team to query if anyone else is having an issue. While there's no issues reported in Australia, a team member in Sri Lanka noticed what's that? Sri Lanka. Woohoo! Noticed strange database behavior an hour earlier and had already lodged a ticket. As a result, Heather's log is marked as low urgency to be actioned within 24 to 48 hours, and she logs off for the night. 7 o'clock on Friday. 5 hours later. By the next morning, the IT services team has received 8 additional complaints from Sydney employees, by 7, they're very keen, who are unable to access files on their local drives, and one from Jason, the Lifeguard's US sales rep. I can't open my sales tool, and there's a file on my desktop from Akira, instructing me to download Tor and visit a chat room. My work laptop won't let me, but I'll try on my home device. My brother-in-law was with the FBI, so I'll ask him. The IT services team suspects a cyber event and has asked the CIO to convene the IRC, Incident Response Committee, and activated the incident response plan. So when something's happened, you've presumably already got a plan in place and you've got a committee of decision makers who meet together. Qantas has it for whenever there's a problem with a flight. I saw the room, they've got this big empty room all set up with technical gear. Whenever there's a crisis, all the key people rush into that room and it becomes like a war room, and they can control flights and make decisions and do things, and it's this sort of situation room really. And so they're going to get a team together and start analysing what's going to happen, and hopefully they've got a plan, an incident response plan. All right, that's the context. Everyone cool with that? Here's your first question. You and the... let me start the quiz. We need to hear the music. How do we make the music louder? I can't do it. I'm so sorry. Here's the quiz. The IRC is convened. The IT director shares Jason's info and other issues still under investigation. What action will you take? Go. A, red. Call external experts for legal, forensic and crisis advice. B, ask IT, yellow, to investigate. And IT, what do we do? Tell us the next steps. Tell Jason, leave the chat room and stop discussing the issue externally. Notify employees via SMS or email to avoid logging in or accessing the network. Which one do you do? You can pick multiple if you want. Go, go, go. 58 answers. Well, you've got to do it like within... do it. I'll stop it when in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Now, how do I stop it? Is it skip? Skip. Here we go. Oh, let's see. So, can I just say, when a crisis is happening, everyone goes nuts. I've been in a couple of these. Everyone is panicking. You better hope you have a plan already, because it's very hard to think of a plan on the surface while it's happening. Whether you call external experts, which lots of you said, or whether you ask IT to investigate, probably has a lot to do with the maturity of your cyber team. If you have a really experienced cyber team, like you're a bank or something, or most of the banks or something, then do it internally. Most companies do not have an experienced cyber team. It's a very bimodal distribution. There's a few companies that are really well cyber protected, and an enormous number of companies and organizations and government departments who are not well cyber protected. In which case, bloody hell, get experts in straight away. What do we have down here? Ask IT to investigate. Yeah, I'm thinking this company's IT probably isn't that good, and you probably have to act fast. It's a small company who's under-resourced. You need to talk to them, so that's a good one. They need to be involved, but probably they're not going to have expertise. Call external experts. Yep, for advice. I'd be doing that straight away. Tell Jason to leave the chat room and stop discussing the issue. When we ran this at the conference, one of the people there who's been in 50 or 60 incident responses and is a real expert, often gets called in as a crisis management person, says, my step one would be to sack Jason. Because you're already in enough of a crisis situation, you don't want to also have to be managing your internal people who are going nuts. The time to tell your internal people not to go nuts is not when the crisis is happening. Hopefully all your internal people have been trained already what to do when a crisis happens. It really needs to be an action item for every single question I'm going to ask, which is, don't you wish you'd thought about this in advance? In fact, I did run a crisis simulation for one of the big banks recently, and I did it like a time machine thing. So we did the scenario, and then bad thing happened, and then we traveled back in time, because the scenario is 2 years from now. What would you do now? What do you wish you'd done now? If you know that's going to happen in the future, what should you be doing now? And then they all wrote plans of what they were going to do now, and then they tried to actually carry that out. So yeah, in advance, dealing with a crisis when it's happening, that is a problem. And what's the last one? Notify employees via SMS email to avoid logging in. That's a good one too. You can assume the bad guys are in the network, in the system. Yeah.
I was saying, like, when you're trying to tell people to do something, I was working in IT support for a larger company, and it's so hard to get people to even just read their emails properly. We sent out an email once that was 3 weeks before we pushed this brand update. One tiny thing was changing with Windows, and we told everyone sent out 3 emails saying this change is going to happen. Be aware of this change. And the week it happened, every single person basically in the office came and said oh no, my laptop's broken. It's no, it's not broken. Did you read the email?
Did everyone hear this? I wish I'd mic'd you. Could everyone hear what you were saying? Could you hear what? Yeah, because that's right. Communication's hard. It's easy to say something. It's much harder to get people to hear something. So yeah, that's right. I would think if everyone complained, then it's probably on the IT team. If 1 or 2 people didn't get it, then you can blame them. If no one got it, then that was a failed communication in some way. And how to do a better communication? That's really hard. And that's one of the case study questions this week, by the way, is exactly how can you communicate with people so they'll actually hear it and change their behavior? It's incredibly difficult. Thank you. That was really good. I hope everyone remembers hearing that. That will be something you experience over and over again. You can tell people till you're blue in the face, they won't necessarily hear you. Next one. All right. Are we up to slide 8 already? How did we get there? Oh yeah, no, that was it. So you and the IT. During the meeting, Jason messages the help desk. Jason includes a screenshot from his personal device with Akira's message. Heather and the other staff are agitated. She's IT head. They request urgent updates from you. My brother-in-law is a ransom expert. I trust him. He says Akira is serious and we should act now. He says he can handle for about US $10,000. That's cheap. Proceed, advise ASAP, please, I want to sleep. And here's what they saw. We accessed your very insecure network and took 35 terabytes of extremely sensitive data, including 1-point source codes. In 24 hours, we will publish on the dark web. By the way, you should have noticed by now, we also encrypted your systems, ready to discuss unlocking them. And I put an actual screenshot from Akira up here. Akira has a really good messaging board set up, and they've made it old school hackery style. It looks like 1980s graphics and colors. And they're really well organized. Like most of these ransomware companies now are really well organized. They run like businesses. That's their business model. They've got this 24-hour chat line. Instead of making an explicit ransom demand, you log in here and they chat with you, and they've got help and all sorts of things. Yeah, Akira's bad news, and it's growing really fast. But of course, there are new platforms appearing all the time. Bad guys just rent a platform or buy a platform. So there you go. That's Akira. We're going to, basically, we'll trash everything and embarrass you, pay us lots of money. Here's your question. Christine, the CISO, by the way, CISO, what does CISO stand for? Chief Information Security Officer. That's right. And they are our heroes. In our business, they are the most important person in the company that we really care about. The CISO is the boss. When you work for a large organization, if you work in the security team, your boss will report to someone who reports to the CISO. Unfortunately, sometimes the chain doesn't go sensibly beyond that. Sometimes the CISO reports to the CIO, the Chief Information Officer. That's not so good. You don't really want security reporting up through IT because IT create the problems, and it's not necessarily in their interest to have their mistakes widely known, so there's a slight conflict. Often the CISO reports up through the risk person or through finance. That's better because they really care about risk in the business. But the CISO is the important person. We have coming, in the very last lecture, unless I've stuffed up the dates, we have coming the CISO from Telstra. She's come to tell you some stuff. She's flying up from Melbourne. We also have the CISO from Suncorp coming the week before that, and the reason he's coming is because he used to work for BP, and he was on board when Deepwater Horizon happened. And we're going to be looking at Deepwater Horizon as an example of an incident. This is an incident, and we're going to look at how they responded, and everyone has regrets afterwards. So let's learn from other people's regrets. So, all right, let's go on with this. Christine says, the company, Lifeguard, she says, I think we should bring in external experts. I think if your CISO saying that, it means they know the maturity of their team isn't strong enough and you do need external people. It'd be very rare to have a company that doesn't need to bring external experts in at this point, because there's people that know about how to deal with ransom and just do it all the time. And it's unlikely, if you've never encountered it before, that you'll know the right things to do. It's a bit like hostage negotiations. You want to get a proper negotiator in. And don't forget that these businesses are just money-sucking bastards, and all they want to do is get money from you. In the old days, they would take your data and encrypt it all and say, pay us money and we'll give you the decryption keys. Some people would pay, some people wouldn't pay. If you don't pay, you have to rebuild the whole system yourself from backups. Recently, actually, a couple of attacks have done this thing that we've long suspected, which is they infiltrate the system, they find out how long you keep backups for, and they recently attacked one company that had a 90-day backup rollover cycle, and they just sat silently in the system for 90 days, then they moved and encrypted everything, and then essentially all the good stuff had been broken already by then. So, yeah, okay, so these guys are just awful. It used to be they'd encrypt your system and you'd pay them to get it decrypted, but some companies decided they didn't want to pay and it was just worth the cost of they themselves rebuilding their systems. You could ask the question, can I trust them? If I pay, will they decrypt my system? Does anyone know the answer to that? Yes. That's their business model. They're very good. Their customer service is better than Microsoft. You ring them up and they'll give you help desk and they'll have support lines and they'll do everything because they want you to know that if you pay that money, they will restore your files. Of course, it could be rogue people, and if you get the experts in, they know all the different bodies that do this sort of thing, all the different ransomware gangs, and they'll say this lot always pay, this lot have paid 90% of the time, so on, so on, so on, so on. These days, they have a different attack strategy rather than encrypting, though Akira is doing both. What is the current strategy that's even more effective? What's that? Threaten to leak it. So you exfiltrate it, you take the data off first, all the data, the passport data, all the Medicare data, all the healthcare records, everything. You get all the data off the system. Then you encrypt what's on the system. And then or maybe you don't even do that. And you say, pay me the money or I'll publish it. Because people didn't used to give a damn when they had a data breach. They'd just pay the ransom and keep it secret. And eventually in the US, they brought in laws that made companies notify when they'd been breached. And the companies kicked up a fuss and no one wanted to have the laws, but they managed to pass them in California. As soon as that happened, when people were data breached, the stock exchange found out about it. Instead of it just being a little thing you swept under the rug, oh yeah, we've got crap security, but no one knows about it, so it's okay. Now the stock market knows about it. So suddenly, in California, they started hiring cyber people like crazy. And for a while there was this sort of suck from around the world of good cyber people from everywhere migrating to California. One by one, the other US states brought it in, and then there's this flood worldwide of people going to America. Slowly, other countries brought it in. Lyria and I agitated for it for a long time. They finally brought it in here, but we're way behind the curve. Already, we've lost lots of great people. We're very slow at bringing in data breach notification, but we have the mandatory one now, but with a whole lot of exceptions, of course, that Lyria has spoken about.
Yeah, so with data breach notification, I think a lot of the issue is less exceptions and more what kinds of data breaches need to be reported in the first place. So they haven't worded it, just to get technical on you, they haven't worded it necessarily as exceptions. There are some exceptions.
Yes.
But the real limitation is the company having to decide if
it's a serious thing.
Yeah.
Well, you can trust the company to make the right decision to self-regulate. But my concern is small companies, because I think you've got to have a turnover of 2 million or something to be caught by it.
So for the federal legislation, yes, although there's also state legislation which applies to state legislation. So there's different bits of it, but yes.
So my concern is
companies
startups.
that fall outside.
Startups that have heaps of data and aren't looking after it, and they're cowboys. Yeah.
It depends on the startup. So if they're if they're a startup that actually deals in data, then they can potentially come within the rule. Yeah. So it's complicated.
Okay, it's complicated. But I think we all agree it's not perfect, but it's something. Because of course no one wanted these mandatory breach notification laws to be passed. Business and the Business Council of Australia and everyone argues against it because it's just more red tape and paperwork. And if you ever hear red tape as a security person, your ears should prick up. Because what red tape means is someone's trying to regulate me and I can't just do whatever I want. And that is really annoying to companies, so they say red tape. But whenever you hear the words red tape, you should think, oh, maybe that's good. We sort of want more red tape. Red tape is nice, and it really annoys people when they have red tape applied to them. But if you're one of their customers, you probably like them being a little bit bound in red tape. What I was going to say is they now threaten to publish the data, and that's embarrassing. And now you're pressured now your incentives are more lining up with doing the right behaviour. If the data gets out there, your customers are embarrassed, your customers are angry, it hurts your business. So now actually you've got a stronger incentive to improve your cybersecurity up front. It's wonderful legislation. I love it so much. So now that's why there's a lot of employment in cyber people. People are realizing rather than it being something that it's just cost of doing business, that we have crap security, now they realize actually this is an existential threat to my business and then we need good security. So it's good. I wish there was less chance for people to not report it, but there was a funny thing. I remember the Information Commissioner puts out a report every year on the number of data breaches that have fallen under the data breach legislation. Before it was brought in, and Lyria, you correct me if I've got wrong, before it was brought in as mandatory, I think for a couple of years, or at least 1 year, they had a code where you could voluntarily report them. And I think, do you remember how many were reported?
Not very many.
I think it's 3, I'm making the number up.
But even then, there was a really interesting news article about the actual number of breaches compared to the reported breaches, even under the legislation, because so many companies are deciding that theirs doesn't meet the
need to be
criteria.
reported. Yeah. So anyway, but I don't think we can trust self-regulation. It would be interesting to look at, if you could go back and look at the number that were reported when it was voluntary to report it, but encouraged, and the number that reported it when they were bound by law to report it. There's a huge jump. So that, to me, shows that the legislation had an impact. All right, so the board agrees they need experts, but everyone has a different idea. Who? Who do you want to be the expert? Oh, well done, James. Oh yeah, nothing's worth any points. But well done, and every question is correct. But James, see if you can be first again. The CISO wants to get externals to investigate. The board agrees they need experts, but everyone has a different idea. Who? Who should it be? Jason's ex-FBI brother-in-law, the previous legal counsel, the CISO's IT forensics vendor, whom she met at a recent conference, notified the insurer and asked the broker for referrals. Go, go, go. I'll stop when we get to 100. Maybe you can pick more than one. Yep. Okay. So, no, 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 no. Please, no. Previous legal counsel, yeah, that could be good. Your previous legal counsel, if they know about it and they're wise, you just want wise heads in the room, so you could throw them in the mix. You do need to know your legal options quite quickly now, because there's all this legislation which, if you contravene it, has quite serious things. But also there's, as we've seen with Medibank, massive financial implications. Everything you say in this process now will be used against you in a class action and cost you bazillions and bazillions of dollars. And the regulators, who are really keen to show they're tough in this area now, are starting to act, and there's potential huge fines. So they're going to scrutinize everything you say. So yeah, I'd get legal in straight away. Absolutely. Forensics vendor who she met at a recent conference. Well, that's funny, isn't it? How do you know who's good and who's not? If they're good, get them. You met them at a conference, they could be good. It is not yet an industry where you can work out who the good professionals are and who the bad ones are. There's a lot of companies in Australia that have all merged together and been bought out by the McDonald's of cybersecurity in Australia. Does anyone know what that firm is called? CrowdStrike? Not CrowdStrike, no. That's worldwide. It's called CyberCX. Has anyone heard of them? CyberCX just bought up every firm, and they've turned into a massive consulting money-making thing. Yeah, so, and government just gets CyberCX in to do everything now. I'm a bit worried about that. But anyway, I sort of wish there was a bit more competition. But yeah, notify the insurer is not a dumb idea, because the insurer will have cyber insurance, and it's in their interests that you don't get too disastered. So it's like you're overseas and you've got overseas travel insurance, and a disaster happens. You want to contact the insurer really quickly, because they'll help you manage it. They'll find good healthcare and all sorts of things. And they're doing that to limit the size of the disaster that's going to happen. Their interest and your interest line up. So yeah, insurers tend to have lots of expertise in this, especially if they're cyber people, and they'll be able to make recommendations of who to good. I mean, you're not exactly lined up with their interests, but you're pretty close to it. So yeah, all of these are good ideas except red. How are we going for time, Lyria?
We have half an hour left.
And are we going to take half an hour?
20 minutes is fine.
20 minutes. All right, let's just go for 10 more minutes. And then we'll stop. Is that all right? Oh, James, you're on fire. That's fantastic. Is this the same list as last time? Wow, you guys are good. Okay, here we go. Live update. But maybe don't try and be fastest. Maybe try and have the most thoughtful answer. Because we'll see in a crisis, actually, that's one thing I do have to say. I was speaking to a crisis manager who manages incident response for a very large organization that has regular incidents every month, big ones. And when the crisis is happening, the board, everyone's galvanized, it's really high and emotional, there's a lot of uncertainty, no one knows what to do. And she said, I should have got her to come and speak. I'll see if I can, otherwise we'll get her next year. And if you're a tutor, pop along and have a peep. I said, what's your advice for someone advising someone in a crisis? And she said, be a little bit cautious what you say. Take a deep breath before you say anything. There's nothing worse, and it's happened to her once and she'll never do it again, than advising the CEO of something and then 20 minutes later having to call them up apologetically and say, actually, no, I misunderstood, that's not happening, that's not the case. She said, just know your facts before you make a quick move. So yeah, okay. In the meantime, Heather can't get access to her machine. Let's skip that one, that's not very interesting. Let's move on to this one. Lifeguards appointed legal, forensic and incident response. That was just what do you do for business as usual? Someone can't operate their system. Should the IT team go and help this person set up their laptop because they've got a presentation due that afternoon to an important client? You don't want to be distracted. You really want to focus on solving this problem. That's the big game. But the reason you're solving it is for business continuity. So if you can solve it and also help business continuity, it's not a stupid thing to do in selected cases to help some people do really critical things still, because business continuity is your business. Don't forget, these guys are about to list on the NASDAQ. Bad news is going to be a disaster for them. Not looking after clients is going to be a disaster. This is a really high stakes attack. And if the attacker realizes it, they'll be able to get quite a lot of money out of it, or ask for quite a lot. They discover unusual network traffic from an unknown external IP over the last 3 nights, indicating possible exfiltration of terabytes of data. Staff in the Philippines and Sri Lanka again have been used unapproved programs. Sri Lanka. Yeah. And MFA was disabled on a domain administrator account, violating the company's cybersecurity policy. This goes to your point here. We've got a policy, but they didn't follow it. Patient data hosted for clients has been encrypted by Akira, and it will take 3 days to determine which clients are affected. That's our status update at 10 to 8 in the morning on the same day. Have I done that? Oh, that's the one we've already done. We've done that one. We've done this one. That's it. So that's where we're up to. And the question is, what are we going to do? Should we notify any third parties now? And if so, who? Oh, sorry. Let's go. Do think about this. Don't race. James, I'm going to be disappointed if you're top again. Oh, 3 of 9. I think we'll only get up to 4 of 9, then we're going to stop. Have we done this one already? Need experts, but who? No, the insurer? Yeah, we did that one. How do we get there? James again? This is weird. James, you're letting me down. Who's James? If anyone's next to James, put your hand up. James, you... This is the question. How should the IT support team respond now? Oh, no. That's the one we skipped. Oh, man, time's a ticking. The blackmails are a blackmailing. Here we go. How should the IT support team respond to this update? What's going on here?
I don't know if you can skip a question, maybe.
We're up to 6 suddenly. Should the committee notify any third parties now? We haven't done that, have we? We did that one? No. Should they notify any third parties now? Yes. Here's a question. I don't even know if you can answer anymore. We've broken Kahoot. But think of what answer you reckon. Should they notify their major clients now, as their medical data is likely compromised? Should they notify law enforcement now? Should they not notify anyone and seek advice and consent from your insurer before you decide? Should they notify the OAIC, the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner, as this is a suspected notifiable data breach? Should they not notify anyone and wait for legal and forensic advice before notifying anyone? Just think about that. And what I've succeeded in is, if you're now really uncomfortable and you have no idea what the right answer is, this is what it's like to be in a crisis. Every one of those answers has potential benefits and risks. It's scary. It's hard to know what to do. The main thing I'm going to say is, when did you need to think about this question? Yeah, a year ago, not now, when it's happening. OAIC, risky, I'd wait. You've got a period to tell them. I'd seek legal and forensic advice. You might have to tell law enforcement immediately. I'd check with, and they can sometimes help. There is a national cyber coordinator now who sometimes helps in incidents, and she can motivate police and get them acting. And police can sometimes go out and grab a server in another country with good relations they've got. I mean, she's able to do good stuff. She seems really good, so maybe you want to tell her. Maybe you have to tell your clients. This is a business thing. You have to be careful how you tell them, but maybe you do need to tell them if their data's been compromised. I'd think seriously about, I'd get advice from the insurer. I'd probably get advice from people.
I think my view would definitely be to get legal and forensic advice first before
Yep.
notifying anyone, and I
Yep.
would include in that law
insurer.
enforcement, the insurer,
Yeah.
major clients.
Yeah.
I mean, because part of it is not just, in reality, this is not
Yeah.
just a yes/no question, like
Yeah.
notify, not notify,
Yeah.
like push button or
Yeah.
not push button. Part of it is how you notify, what you have to tell them.
And what you say.
And what you say. So, for example, in terms of notifying people affected, which are presumably the clients, there are things that they have to be told under the
Yeah,
legislation.
that's
so
right.
telling them the wrong things and then
Yeah.
sending them another email a week later going,
Oh,
actually,
no,
we left that off. And
that's public relations disaster.
It actually
Yeah.
is a communications problem and makes people more upset. So I would definitely start
I
with
would
grievance.
too, Lyria. I would never thought I would say this, but I would go to the lawyers and the forensics straight away because this is a minefield. I think that's spot on. And you can't undo any of these other actions. And you've set wheels in motion when you do it. It is a bit of a nightmare. Would it be useful to get a lawyer who does data breaches to come along? Because Alan's cybersecurity lawyer, Valeska. I
actually have a podcast I did with her. I think you had one too. Did you create a podcast with her when you met with her?
don't think I did.
So I created it for a different course because it was the master's course.
Would it be
but
good to get her to come along and talk to people?
Well, it could be good to get her to come along, or just even ask her if she's happy to make that podcast available.
Okay, all right, let's do that. I taught her when she was in primary school.
What?
I taught her, no, high school, when she was in high school.
In what did you teach her?
I taught her computing. She was so smart that her dad contacted the uni and said, I've got a super smart daughter, what can you do? And I said to our head of school, who was a really nice man, let's set up a high school thing for high school students so we can teach them. And she was our first high school student to come along, along with some other famous people now who are doing famous things. And now she heads up cyber at Allen's. So it's pretty awesome. It makes me happy every time I see her. She was awesome then. But would you be interested in hearing her talk about data breaches? Because she deals with the legal side of them all the time. They're always being called into breaches when they happen. Because people get to this step and think, actually, we'd better call in legal. And your own legal, of course, won't know. Or it'd be sheer luck if they did. I don't think we have time to do any more. We might do some more later on if you're interested in just going through the steps. I really just wanted you to be frightened by the questions, really, more than anything, and suddenly think, this is hard. There's another 3 difficult questions. At the end, the question is, are you going to pay the ransom? What do you reckon?
I think it depends on what legal tells you. Because if the company is known for giving you the data back,
Yes.
then I think you should. But if it's not known for that, and it's a new company, then maybe not.
Yes.
I think it depends on
Yes.
the context.
I think that's good. It's Ahmed, isn't it?
Abdul.
Abdul. Yeah, Abdul's right. It depends on the context. You need to know a little bit about the company. Let's think about what the risks are. So we always think of risks. Chris last night was talking about hash functions, and we're talking about hash attacks on them. We'll come back to hash functions, not for the lawyers. Next Monday, I'll do a quick revision of them. But one thing we didn't get time because we ran out of is the question we should always ask first is something we call the threat model. So what's at stake here? What are you worried about actually happening? So with a hash function, before you know if a hash function is good or not, you have to know what's the problem we're concerned about. So what are the problems with a data breach? What are the things the company's petrified about? Tell me, guys, in this situation here. Yes. Losing access, they've got business continuity stuff. They can't do their business. They could even permanently lose access to the data, which would be humiliating as well. But yeah, they can't do their business. Good.
Reliability for the company goes out the window. So basically all these clients that they have are going to be like, they lost all my data. Why should you be with me?
They're about to list. How much people pay when a firm lists is a lot to do with hype and trust and the vibe. If they just look like clowns, who's going to take a gamble on them? Yeah, they have a big reputational threat here. Yep. Is that a hand up? No, stretch. All right, so reputational damage, loss of business continuity. What else? Come on, there's a big one. We have to, how I sometimes tease out the threat model is ask the question, what are the assets we're trying to protect? So they're trying to protect their ongoing business. That's asset 1. They're trying to protect their reputation. That's asset 2. What's another asset they should be trying to protect? Oh.
Their
Go.
Deregulation.
Yeah. Oh, what do you mean by deregulation?
Like, I don't know, they could get like
Oh yeah, future liability. Yep, future liability. So there could be a big financial penalty if they disclose too much information. And the customers. This is people whose medical data has been lost that they were entrusting. They have to look after their customers. So if you pay the ransom, what happens? What's the benefit of paying the ransom? If you pay the ransom, you'll get business continuity back because they'll unencrypt your systems. So whether you feel safe using them or not, because you'd better find out how they got in and fix that up. So you'll probably get business continuity. If you pay the ransom, maybe you don't need to tell anyone this thing happened and it protects your reputation. But what does paying the ransom not do? Oh yeah.
I was just gonna say, like, what if like the attackers like who ask you to pay the ransom, they don't fulfill their promises? Or,
Yeah, what's your name? Nathaniel. Thanks, Nath. Yeah, Nathaniel's got it. We know because from investigations of previous breaches, they do unencrypt your systems and they don't publish the data in a way that embarrasses you, but they also don't delete it. Copies of the data are kept there. And we know that in a number of instances that these companies are affiliated with large state actors and provide data to them. And no one talks about it and it's not publicised, so you won't get embarrassed, but your data is being sent offshore probably and it has been lost. So paying the ransom doesn't protect that. Look, we don't have time to do any more. I'm sorry. Oh, see ya.
I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. Because Lyria and I want to talk now. So most companies pay the ransom, by the way. You have to be careful in Australia. There's a couple of legal pitfalls if you get it wrong, but most companies pay. The most famous company that didn't pay would be Medibank. The only company that I think has a reasonable reason for not paying, was Medibank. You know, if you had to pick a company that should have paid, bloody hell, Medibank, why didn't you pay? My personal theory is that Optus paid. You know, the attack just mysteriously went away. And if Optus didn't pay above the board and it's not on the company's books, my personal theory is that just some billionaire in Singapore paid. It's a Singaporean company. It's entirely captured.
Yeah, I wonder what the effect is going to be, though, of the new legislation.
Yeah,
So one of the things the new legislation does is say you have to report all the ransoms that you pay. Now,
but Optus might escape that.
Theoretically, the government's not going to use that for any other purpose under the legislation. But there are, I mean, you can get in a lot of trouble for paying, for example, if there's sanctions or if there's funding terrorism. Or it depends
Proceeds
on,
of
that's why it
crime.
depends on who the organisation is.
Yep.
But once those laws have already been there for a long time, but once you then have to report that you paid, I don't know if it's going to be as popular an option. But time will tell.
My personal theory, and this isn't based on anything, I'm 99% sure the Optus one was paid. But my personal theory is it was probably someone at arm's length that didn't even tell Optus officially that it was paid. It wasn't Optus paying it. So I think that would escape detection. I think.
Even if you did legislate having to pay it.
Not being allowed to pay it. Having to disclose payment.
Having to disclose it. If I was trying to ransom a company, it's not like, and I knew that legislation existed, I'd still want to optimize the chance that you pay me, which means I would not make the ransom publicly. I'd just do it under board, and then you pay me. Like, what's forcing a company that's already shady anyway, who's already paying
like Optus,
a terrorist organization? What's to make them go, oh, this illegal thing, we better report ourselves for doing it?
I'm more optimistic. I mean, I'm not big on companies, but I think that's something that potentially threatens the whole existence of your company. I don't think any board would would want to.
You also start to get into directors being personally
Directors are
liable
personal
for things.
yeah.
You know, I think,
Yeah.
you know, people, you know, it becomes quite
Yeah.
difficult at that point. I think to say, you know, that you'll accept the penalties of, especially if it's going to be deliberate non-compliance with the law. You can, you know, and directors personally. I think that's a bit of a step. I'm not saying there won't be dodgy companies that will pay the ransom and find a way of doing it that I think no one's going to find out.
Yeah, it's not. It's a consulting fee.
Yeah,
It's
you know,
not a ransom.
I'm sure that will happen,
Yeah.
but you know, it certainly will be less likely that Optus, for example, would take that.
They
risk.
couldn't do it. They'll lose their social license.
Have you read about like controversial the Wise Tech recently in like the
Oh yeah, Wise Tech.
stuff?
Yeah.
I'm not like we don't need to go in depth, but like I feel like that's a good example of a company doing something boldly not great, not reporting on it, and like now it's coming to bite them in the arse. But like I don't know, it's just how effective is mandatory reporting?
Well, I think it just depends what it's backed up by. As Leary is saying, if it's criminal sanctions against directors, then that's
I've got
pretty
to check
effective.
that in the new bill, but yeah.
I imagine we'll move into the space like we do with tax, that we'll have disclosure avoidance and disclosure evasion. And, you know, how close can you skirt? Yes. And then we'll stop. Last one, if that's all right, and then we'll flip over to Leary.
I was going to say, if you're relying on this, you're kind of just relying on a secret being held by everybody involved.
Well, that's right. It's hard to keep a secret.
You know, yeah.
It's hard to keep a secret. And think about it. One of the earlier slides said, should we just tell everyone not to talk about it? You've got a company full of people. It's going to leak. Someone's going to talk about it. You know about secrets. We all know. There'll be someone who whistleblows, or someone who just leaks it out, or someone who tells their partner or their crazy brother-in-law who used to work for the FBI. You just can't. It's very hard to keep secrets. So a strategy that involves on keeping. And the attackers are very cunning now. They put a copy of the ransom email. This group does a copy of the ransom email on every folder on every machine they attack. So employees get to see the ransom letter too. And in fact, if we'd got to the end of this scenario, they start hassling the chairman and directors' children and parents. They know everyone's phone numbers, they know where everyone lives, and they start calling them up and saying, why aren't you paying? And now that is quite scary for the directors and the children. So it's very hard to keep this secret. Let's not talk anymore. We'll come back to it later on if you're interested. We'll try and get Valeska in if we can.
Okay. So who's listened to the surveillance podcast? Yay! All right. If you haven't listened to it yet, listen to it. It is part of the course. I reserve the right to write an exam question on it. So the first thing was just, did anyone... Does that not work?
That works for people at home. This works for people
I have to hold
here.
both?
Yeah.
Is that better? Okay. The first thing is, does anyone have any questions? And we also said if anyone had any questions on the privacy stuff as well, because that was very rushed as well. So if anyone has any questions on either the privacy stuff I talked through or the surveillance podcast? No questions. It was also obvious and easy. Great. That means it's even easier to write an exam question on it. But I did put some questions at the end of the surveillance podcast, and in particular asked everyone to think about what data might be being collected. And this is a really interesting one. So in one sense, and I went through all the different kinds of surveillance laws, you know, at a very high level and simplistically in the podcast. But on the one hand, you could just look at all the laws, right? And you could say, let's see what all the laws say government can do by way of surveillance, yeah? And you could say, okay, so we know that's happening and we know that's happening. And there's some reporting mechanisms under some of them where you can find out how many times it happened and so forth. But really interesting stuff has gone on in a number of countries, including maybe most famously the UK and the US, where data was being collected and the people who read the laws hadn't realised that that was a thing. Yep. In other words, they'd read the laws and they'd had their own ideas about what government was doing under those laws, but their imagination stopped short of what was actually happening. And this is what came out of the Edward Snowden leaks, and you know, sort of more that came out afterwards in both jurisdictions and some of the more political shenanigans around it. And in the UK in particular, it was quite interesting because they were able to point to a law and say, we're using this law, right? And everyone sort of read it again and they're like, oh, I suppose, you know, if you kind of read it that way, maybe you can interpret this. And you know, it was quite a broadly
Yeah.
worded law, and so it kind of made sense ex post. But no one who read it ex ante thought that's the thing that's happening. And in the US...
Can you think of an example of a perhaps morally questionable thing they were doing, or a surprising thing they were doing?
It was basically, you know, I mean, and in both cases, in the case of the US and the UK, there were various forms of mass surveillance. In other words, surveillance that is happening, not like this is the one person we suspect of a crime, and so we're going to, you know, wire them. Some of the stuff that came out of the UK that was surprising, I think we mentioned this before, was surveillance of people who lived out of area for a school zone. So they would be surveilling people to prove that they didn't really live where they said they lived inside the school zone, and were therefore fraudulently sending their kids to a particular public school.
People that went outside the 5-mile limit to visit a dying parent?
There was talk about it. One of the things that happened really early on in COVID, there was this big government style sort of workshop on how we can control COVID. One of the local councils that I shall leave nameless, not in New South Wales actually, this one, said that, you know, this is fine. We actually have data on the location of every single person in our local council area based on tracking their mobile phones all the time. And we already have that. We just have that now. So we can use that and like tell you when there's 10 people in the same place that shouldn't be there. And that was a revelation. So that's an example of something that surprised me in Australia, because
I was at an award ceremony once for public service people who'd done good things, the Public Service Awards, and there was a company that was most innovative, and they had a product that they'd sold to the police in New South Wales, and presumably in other jurisdictions too, which after a crime had happened, the police could say, tell me all the phone numbers, tell me all the phones of people who were near this crime at the time it happened, and correlate that with all people who were near similar crimes in the past and tell us, and identify people that way. And everyone was clapping the award, and I was going, because to do that, they'd have to log the location of everyone in advance before they knew they were committing a crime all the time to be able to retrospectively go back. And it was like a confession that was happening because the police had bought this product.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
But I kind of wanted to send that back out to all of you and say, you know, what kinds of surveillance could be happening, either because you look at the laws that are there and you think, actually, you could read that this way, or because physically, and you've all been doing, you know, security everywhere and all of that, and physically you walk around and you see cameras and so forth, and you're curious, like, what is at the other end of that camera? So either it can be based on a sort of legal question, or it can be based on just a sort of question, you know, from what you know of the cameras and the systems and IT systems and data, what kinds of surveillance might we need to worry about? Yeah.
One of the kind of big ones, I think this is a thing, I know it's a thing in the US, I think it's starting to come here, is cars. Basically, if you've ever seen like the tire pressure gauge, if you have like a newer car where it knows how much pressure is in like the air pressure, that's a wireless communication protocol, which means that the little boxes that you see on the side of like the power line, like the you know, phone line towers and whatnot, have a little thing that listens out for those, and each car tire is uniquely identified, not just to, like to the vehicle.
Wow.
So it's like your Toyota Camry front left tire is broadcasting a unique MAC address times, you could probably use that. I don't think it's encrypted. I'm gonna do that.
That's so cool.
But yeah, like I know Teslas do this. There's probably a lot of other like more modern, obviously, cars, like newer cars. But yeah, so you can kind of see where someone is without needing their number plate. You can just track their car by using this, like presumably police could use that technology.
And that's actually a question that's been asked. So you can read, if anyone is interested, a series of National Transport Commission reports, including one that we did as a report to them, and then they wrote reports in reply about how we deal with car surveillance. In other words, if the future of traffic is cars talking to infrastructure to work out the best routes, cars talking to other cars to avoid crashing into them, And so cars are sort of constantly broadcasting their location and where they're going and all of that kind of stuff for all of this optimization that might happen in the future. Not to mention cars, internal black boxes, cars and tyres, all of this. What should the protocols be? So this is something that the National Transport Commission was asking as a question. This sort of sits on sort of nationally sort of monitoring all the different states' laws around transport. So at least they were doing the right thing, Richard, in terms of asking the questions before the cars had been invented.
Yes.
Although I haven't seen a lot of
Yes.
follow-up now that they're on the roads.
Just adding on, because it was about surveillance in cars. I believe Ford has a patent where they made a system which had microphones in your cars that would listen to what you're talking about and would then give you relevant advertisements depending on where you're driving. So if you're talking about being hungry, it might give you a McDonald's advertisement on the infotainment display on your car, which is a bit dystopian.
Right, and also not only inside the car, where at least theoretically there's consent, but potentially outside the car, right, in terms of the people who are walking past the car and all of that kind of stuff. Is there a question? Comment?
I did actually have a question about the signals on the tire pressure monitoring systems, because I know the old style tire pressure monitoring systems just use RF signals, which it doesn't exceed over 7 meters. So the fact you can't really use an antenna far away to like capture that at all. And another thing is Tesla's use the Bluetooth technology. So different cars might use different ones, and Bluetooth technology also is not that far. It needs like extra boosters to be able to like send that signal even farther away. And also all these boxes have independent serial numbers that capture that kind of data, which yes, like usually you need to activate that kind of pairing before you can like, they can send data, but it's also dependent on how often they send the data. And like, it's just also with the proximity of the 4 sensors in the same area, you can't exactly identify which one's which. That is also dependent. So if they have a centralized system, that's like when they can get it. Otherwise, it's not really like useful to get that kind of data just flying around. Thanks.
The attack vector is more like if it's the police doing it on every road in every intersection.
Hold on, wait. Sound amplification on online people.
Yeah, the attack vector comes more down to like if it's, say, New South Wales Police puts a thing on every tower in Sydney, for example, then it's a more realistic attack vector. It's not like you could just, do it as one person, right? And you could also use the fact that there's 4 tires, right? 4 serial numbers is more unique than 1 in some sense. Like if you see the same 4 serial numbers here and then at George Street and then at Chatswood or whatever, like you could probably make an educated guess that those are the same, like the tires from the same car. But there obviously are still limitations about range and all of that as well, but a bigger antenna never hurt anyone.
But also as just a more general comment, rather than the specific details, that it's possible means it's an opening that clever people can use. We don't know how people can exploit things. I know in the old days we used to think Wi-Fi was sufficiently short range to stop eavesdropping. And I remember one of my students 20 years ago, who's now the head of security at a big bank, made a great Pringles detector and spied his friend across a valley, I think from one side of Wahroonga to the other, and was able to pick up his friends. I can't believe it was possible. So we never know what's possible. Just once there's an opening, it becomes possible. And that goes to Lyria's point about the national road network people. Whenever the government passes legislation or makes regulation, I would hope, if we're ever advising them, or you ever are, we always put sunset clauses in or revision clauses, because what seems impossible today, tomorrow we might suddenly realise is possible. So even with the best will in the world, when we come up with regulation and suggestions, in 3 years' time, we'll suddenly realise that's out of date. So set and forget legislation and standards are terrible. I love it when we'll come back in 3 years and check this.
I have a very long answer to that, Richard, which I'll come in a minute. There's just one last comment from the room and then...
One last thing on surveillance and the government. According to WikiLeaks, Snowden documents, there's a program called PRISM which can unilaterally access data and perform extensive in-depth surveillance on all your internet communications information, probably even through VPN. They can query databases and get anything you they want, even if you're a naturalized US citizen.
That's right. PRISM. And before
yeah,
that...
a bit more complicated than that. But I wanted to go back to the...
Oh, can I just say, before
Yeah.
that was Tempest. You might want to look up the Tempest program too. So yeah. But sorry, Lyria.
Yeah, no, I mean, my understanding of whether all that ended up in the US was that US citizens were getting caught because they were in conversations with non-US citizens rather than the program being able to directly target US citizens, which was still illegal.
Yes.
But that was...
I think they hoovered up all the data in anticipation.
Right, but they didn't...
Yeah.
Collect, not read, but
Yes,
then other
yeah.
risks. No, you're... Okay, fair point. But I did want to come back on the question of sunset laws, because I don't think that's the solution.
Or revision laws.
Well, okay, so...
Or oversight bodies.
Oversight bodies is a different thing to sunset. So the problem with sunset is that you know, yes, you can say, let's try this law for a while and end it. But there's actually a better way to draft that in, which is actually to be deliberately technology specific.
Yes.
So if you are deliberately technology specific when you're drafting a law, it will naturally sunset when that's no longer the relevant technology.
In the things that you allow.
So
yeah.
it's actually a better, if you
That's
deliberately
clever.
want it to end, and it's actually better because who knows if it's going to be 5 years or 3 years or 10 years before such stuff changes. So if you have a law that you deliberately actually want to own, you don't understand enough about the future technology that you want to say, we're only going to allow surveillance with these devices or whatever, but we have to ask the question again when there's a future device that might do different things.
Built-in obsolescence.
Built-in obsolescence.
But I would bet the Department of Home Affairs is onto that now and would say, let's redraft this a bit.
Well, they tend to do the opposite.
Yeah.
They tend to draft deliberately because they want it to stay wide, irrespective of technological change.
That's right.
But
Yeah.
maybe we need to finish because it's after 6.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Lyria. Thank you, everyone, for interesting questions. Today, we talked about data, we talked about surveillance, but really we were talking about incidents and what to do when a crisis happens. I hope you realise the significance of how big that question is, and I hope you remember at least one thing, if nothing else, which is think about it before the crisis happens. If you learn nothing else in this whole course, that's a really useful thing to do. Now we're going to pause, everyone that needs to go, go, and then we're going to stay and watch The China Syndrome, which is a wonderful film about a crisis. Thank you, everyone. Yes? Oh, is there a lecture attendance question? Oh, yes, there is. Sorry, I completely forgot. The lecture attendance question is, say if they should pay the ransom, what are the advantages and disadvantages? It's not on Moodle? Ah.
Just give everyone 100% attendance.
Everyone has 100% attendance for tonight. Yeah. Woohoo!